the North Group. Security, refined by intelligence. We're here to spotlight the best practices and critical safety and security issues in today's world and provide actionable strategies that you can implement into your day-to-day operations. From the individual to organizational level, our goal is to improve your risk management and response capabilities. Thanks for spending time with us today, and here's your host.
Welcome to another podcast here at TNG, the North Group. We're real excited about our guest today. We have Michael Gracie, who's a retired Army colonel and now the city manager of Ashland, Kentucky, amidst the COVID-19 crisis. Steve, do you want to open us up?
Good day, Michael. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time. We'll get right into it. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your transition from the military, and how that may have prepared you for challenges like a pandemic?
Sure, Steve. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to give a perspective, especially I think we're in pretty different parts of the country. But it's a great opportunity for us, and tell you a little bit about the part of the country I'm living in. Son of a soldier. My dad was retired Army, 23 years. I've always been around the Army. Retired after 33 years total service. Was prior enlisted in the National Guard and then went on active duty in 1988. Served in air defense artillery the vast majority of the first part of my career. And then when I was selected soon after being selected for Lieutenant Colonel, was selected to take a garrison command. Spent 3 years. Some of us had opportunity to go 3 years in command and garrison. They realized it was very different than normal, whatever combat arms, combat support command. And the Army went back and forth. Sometimes they allowed 3, sometimes they allowed 2. But commanded Fort A.P. Hill for 3 years in Virginia, training installation, and then did a couple of other things and came back and was selected as a colonel to command Fort Jackson in South Carolina. Again, they gave us the option to go 3 years. I took it. I really enjoyed the work. It just changes. Maybe it supports adult ADD. And I don't mean to mock that, but I'm just saying it just shifts every day. 1 minute you're in a child development center, and the next minute you're, in a ditch looking at some electrical challenge or something along those lines. But and then my final assignment was in the Pentagon, where I served as the executive officer to the assistant chief of staff for installation management. So kind of like a chief of staff, and got to see $16 billion budget. It doesn't sound right. It really doesn't sound right. But 156 garrisons that they were responsible for worldwide. So I was able to see it from both the foxhole and then also, from the 30,000-foot view. And it really helped enable me transition into the duties as a city manager. My command and control structure is very similar. As far as the transition from the military, I really miss the culture. I am in extreme eastern Kentucky, and there's no, other than National Guard or reserve units, there's no, and recruiting, which we do have a recruiting office in town. I go down there every once in a while to get a little hua. But yeah, this is the farthest and longest I've ever been away from the military, and I really, really miss the culture quite a bit. And that's nothing against the culture here. It's just, you all know with your backgrounds, being around that culture is something you grow accustomed to. Similar expectations, mores, values, and I do miss that. Like I said, the duties are virtually identical of a garrison commander to a city manager. The biggest difference is the decision-making process, the effect of elected politics. And again, that's not a pejorative thing. It's just, when you're in the Army, you deal with the military decision-making process, both formally and informally. And that's not how decisions are made and necessarily evaluated. I still try to use a similar process with my staff. When I do make recommendations to the mayor and the commissioners, it is not a formal MDMP, but I think that's probably the biggest difference. On a personal level, been married for 30 years, almost 31 this summer. 3 sons, all married, and just recently blessed with a grandchild.
Great, Mike. And of course, you and I served together as lieutenants. I was counting this out 31 years ago. We were in Germany together, I think freezing out on some field training exercise, and then later connected when you were there AP Hill, and I was FBI instructor at Quantico. So, Mike, let me ask you this. Do you feel that your military career prepared you for the challenges of a pandemic? I mean, did you ever really feel that we'd be in this situation?
Yes, that it did best prepare me for dealing for a crisis like this and other crises. I paused for a second because, hindsight's 2020, and looking over and what's going on now. I made a joke with somebody yesterday. How could I not see, 2 months ago to invest in Domino's? But as far as what the military does to prepare you to think ahead, to plan ahead, to have contingency plans, that's all very true. The type of exercises that we do in preparation for things. And so I say all of that and it all briefs well, but the fact of the matter is a lot of that, looking over my shoulder, wow, could we have done things differently? Of course we could have. I remember when we did exercises, like at the division or corps level exercises where you drill on things like this. And I, in my mind's eye, I remember getting in those exercises and you just, at some point, you just kind of throw up your hand. You're like, yeah, we're just kind of screwed when that happens. And the pandemic always seemed to fall into that kind of category. It almost seemed impossible to happen. A lot of stuff that you'd see on movies, and bam, here we are. As far as other military preparation, I think the leadership in crisis, trying to stay calm, because I've got a staff, an authorized staff of 308 people, and there's 308 different reactions to this. And a lot of their reactions are based on what they experience at home. I was talking to somebody yesterday and talked about how this shows itself in different ways. I had an incident where somebody was lashing out pretty hard at me, and I thought, wow, it's just really bizarre, and had nothing to do with the with COVID-19. And you see different stress levels. Some people on one extreme absolutely, I don't know if I'd say still, but some initially did not see this as a threat. And then others were afraid that, they were going to die that afternoon. So trying to manage that, keep everybody calm and focused was a challenge. I think the military especially helped me out with the experiences that I had for the 30 plus years.
That sounds great, Mike. I mean, it sounds like your experience has really prepared you, to take on, the journey as a city manager here. Talk to me about how, the city of Ashland and your staff and your police department and your fire department. Talk to me about how everybody's doing during this crisis.
Overall, very positive. I look at the citizens, the businesses, different organizations are here. The vast majority of people took the threat very seriously, very early. Much like most states, our governor has a daily press conference. He's had it for a couple of weeks now. No rocket science there. It's just been a calm, steady delivery. And of course, it's turned into a lot of funny memes and whatnot on the internet. But I think definitely what they've reflected and what they've absorbed from the federal level, and then at the state level, that guidance, and then that cascading down to us at the city level has had a positive impact. And I've seen that in number one, in the fact that people, as I mentioned, are very calm. Also, a lot of great teamwork that's happened. And you talk about the preparation in the military, how that's done. I think you all are familiar with the adage, you never want to meet somebody for the first time in a crisis that you really need to know. Informally or subconsciously, I did that. Not informally, subconsciously, I think I had taken that lesson from my assignments and in the Army, and had reached out to, the Boyd County Emergency Manager, the Boyd County Judge Executive. That's the county we live in, by the way, Boyd County, Kentucky. And so I knew and have developed a relationship with those players over the last almost 3 years. It's been almost 3 years since I took over the position. But watching them all come together in a crisis, we had a big deal with hepatitis B, the breakout. I'm not sure if you all remember that very much, how that kind of made national news, and we did some things locally, and so we had the opportunity to work with the health department. But watching our Ashland, Boyd County, Catlettsburg emergency management come together, along with the Sheriff's Department, the local hospital, King's Daughters Medical Center, and I know I'm going to leave people out. The Boyd County Health Department, it's been very positive. And I think procedurally, things have stayed on cue. Again, reporting formats, trying to get PPE, and I know we're going to get into that discussion, but it's been a very measured approach, very logical, and I think that's done well for not just Ashland, but the entire county and the region that's been affected by this. Messaging also, making sure that we had good messaging to our citizens to keep them calm has been, I think, another success story. PSAs by our mayor, commissioners, and other local officials has been positive.
Well, Mike, it sounds like you have a great team there. Seems like it's working well. I want to ask you about risk management. How is the city of Ashland handling that? Do you have a certain personnel that oversee that, or is, again, that a team effort?
We do. We're actually blessed to have a risk manager. He's housed in the HR department in an advisory role, staff advisory role. He focuses on traditionally employee safety, general loss prevention and reduction, and also insurance cost control. He has been more involved since I've been here with some of the force protection things. There were some areas that I was a little uncomfortable with when I came here as far as force protection in regards to events that we had in the city. And so when I think of force protection here, I really look at my chief of police. He pretty much has the lead on that in coordination. Like you said, Brig, it is a team effort. But traditionally, Mike Atkins, as our risk manager, has been involved in those areas that I had mentioned before. He's pretty much dealt on lagging indicators in the past. So employee injury results, incurred insurance, premium reductions, things like that. And now we've got an effort that's moving towards leading indicators. So an emphasis on training, groups level projects, awareness. He's done a magnificent job in the safety realm for, putting safety boards out there that I'm sure you guys are all familiar with from different units that you've been in, and different units you're in, how they took that seriously or not. But he's definitely putting his toes more into other areas than I understand he did before. And also, when I talked to my chief of police and chief of the fire department, this is not a position that historically, and I'm not saying since my arrival, so don't take it that way, but just historically has really grown and evolved in their responsibilities. He does a really good job of monitoring both federal and state requirements and pushing that down. And you guys know how much that changes and adjusts. So having somebody solely focused on that is pretty important. In the law enforcement realm, our chief, our police department work very closely with the Kentucky League of Cities. They've got a training program and they have a training safety officer. So they put out guidance as far as both operational and also training scenarios for our police department. And we've been participating in that probably for about 5 years and have integrated that into our training and also the operations in the police department.
Sounds like you guys are pretty well prepared there in Ashland there, Michael. One of the things that's come up with folks we've talked to around the country, both in city management and police departments, is mutual aid requests and out-of-county communications, out-of-city communications. Talk to me a little bit about that, because coming from a little bit of an incident command background and having, trained with law enforcement folks, it's interesting to see how some cities, small, large, and medium, tend to handle this differently. But I've heard of smaller cities, smaller counties, especially in the South, down there in the Bible Belt, banding together, using kind of a mutual aid function for things like, PPE, other supplies. So talk to us about that. Talk to us about, how you're working with your network and the community.
That's a great point. So our fire department is the only fully professional I think that's a correct way to say that, east of Winchester. And so Lexington is about an hour and a half, maybe 90 miles away from us. They've got a professional fire department. I believe Winchester does also. So we have a ton of volunteer fire departments here, and our mutual aid agreements with them are crucial for them, especially. Not that it's unimportant for us, because there's been times where we've been saturated, or, for example, if we wanted to have our guys participate in some type of honorary representation, if there's a firefighter that dies or something like that, to know that we've got somebody that's covering our back if we need that. We even, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with where Ashland is located, but it is in the tri-state area of Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And we've actually done a mutual aid agreement with the Huntington Airport. So we practice some firefighting methods with them to help in an emergency situation there. Of course, that airport was made famous by the crash of the Marshall aircraft, Marshall football team back, I believe it was 1970. So yeah, the mutual aid is really important. We've got a fantastic fire department, about 50, I think 53 total. That's both firefighters and administrative and inspectors. Very experienced fire chief, been here 30 plus years, a genuinely good guy. Our police department also has fantastic mutual aid relationships with other local law enforcement, to include the county and other small cities that are immediately adjacent to us. So Ashland is about 20,000 people is our population. We peaked in 1970. The impact of reduction in steel from Armco Steel and also reduction at Marathon have really affected our population. I think our peak was 32,000 in 1970, and it's been on a decline. It'll be very interesting to see what the census reveals, the upcoming or the ongoing census, because that 20,000 is a big number. The state cities used to be classified by category. Category 1 were above 100,000, and Cat 2 were 20,000 to 100,000. And so I don't want to say it's a WASTA or trying to think of the word, pride thing, but staying above 20,000 is a big deal. We're also, this area was designated as a HIDA just recently, and so we're doing a lot of work with the feds that is, just reaping huge benefits for us. We, like the rest of the country, have got big challenge with opioids, big challenge with problems that are associated with that, and that designation of the HIDA, and I'll give Chief credit. Todd Kelly has been our police chief. I think he took over a couple years or a year before I got here. A career police officer over 30 years. His father used to be the chief of police here many years ago and also was a mayor. But just a fantastic team that we've got there. Very focused. And like most organizations across the country, we don't have the resources. We'd love to have more personnel. We could do more with more personnel. But across the city, we're a pretty cheap date. We get a lot done. 300 sounds like a lot of folks, but when we run our own utilities. We have our own water treatment plant. We have our own wastewater treatment plant, distribution, and that's a lot of manpower. So my utility section is 70 people. And of course, it's a lot of responsibility, but we get a lot done with those 308 people.
Feel as if the mutual aid support has strengthened your ability to better help the people. What's your, as not only a city manager, but a renowned military leader, coming from your background, somebody that I can relate to, having followed, right, on deployments and things like that, and looked at that leadership. What's your recommendation to other city managers and executives around the country that are dealing with the stresses of building those relationships and feeling like they're alone on an island?
Boy, a really good friend of mine, Stu McCrae, was a garrison commander at Fort Rucker when I was at Fort Jackson. And he, some people have sign-offs on their emails, they'll have a Bible verse or something like that. He had one of the most insightful ones, and it was very short and pithy, but we move at the speed of trust. And I say that to my staff all the time. And I quote Stu, I think he coined that. But if I'm not questioning what your motives are, we're moving at a much, much quicker pace. And I think to your point on the mutual aid and people feeling like they're on an island, listen, now's not the time to hunker down in your office. It is really hard for me to get out of this office. I can't do the work from home. Somebody interviewed me yesterday and, how much time are you spending at home? Well, I took one BTC, but there are still things day to day that go on that I have to be here for. I have to be around the city for. And it's easy, the tyranny of the inbox, the tyranny of the email, that stuff has to be accomplished, of course, because it's important. But to your point on people that feeling like they're alone on an island, man, they've got to get out and, really build those relationships. And a lot of times a crisis is an opportunity to do that. And like I said, I'm very blessed because the team in this county is very effective. They know what they're doing. I've heard anecdotal stories about other parts of the state where the emergency management, can't get their act together on assisting in FEMA aid for, when we have severe rain events or storm events. And our guys, man, they're just fantastic. While I think I've got a pretty aggressive team in my public services department, we have one of our individuals trained on requesting that FEMA support. I've got to tell you, Tim England he's our emergency manager. He's usually ahead of us. Hey, have you guys thought about this? And it always feels good to say, yeah, we're working on it. But, he won't let us fall. He won't let us fail, and he's staying ahead of us. And that's just, again, the power of that teamwork goes a long way.
Mike, did you, and I'm assuming you did, participate in a number of tabletop exercises, especially as an installation commander. What are some of the general lessons you learned from those activities, and how's it applying to your job today?
Yeah, there was a ton of tabletop exercises I participated in my career. As a garrison, if I recall, we had quarterly requirements to do some type of exercise and an annual requirement to do a full-scale exercise. Of course, you all know this on your experience, just what you get through the TTXs, oh man, I didn't think about that. When the other disciplines come in, that's my favorite part of running an organization is when everybody gets together and you think you know what you know, and I love it when it's the newest person or I hate the lowest ranking person or whatever, and they're like, hey, have you thought about this? And all the smart, wise guys are like, well, maybe we did, and they'll come up with something that you get to employ and make the operation stronger. And of course, you have to have an environment where people feel like they're heard too. You all know, that when you've been in an environment and somebody immediately shuts down your idea is stupid, well, what are the chances that person's going to open their mouth again? Not very good. And so classic brainstorming techniques, there's no bad idea. But my experience on the TTXs and the other full-scale exercises was that it always prepared us for things. I noticed the trend my last couple of years that it seemed like every full-scale exercise was an active shooter. And, it's a threat, right? I mean, it's a very real threat. And so we got on paper, I shouldn't say on paper, training-wise, I thought we got pretty good at responding to, an active shooter scenario. My DPTMS, Director of Plans, Training, Mobilization, and Security at Fort Jackson, really stood his guns, I think my second or third year in command, and we had a full-scale exercise that was a chemical spill, and then they also folded in a terrorist attack, if I recall correctly. And so, man, that was a difficult scenario to deal with, but of course we all got better because of it. We dealt with, I'm going to forget the name of the county down there. I think it was Richland County, their sheriff's department, their local hospitals, in addition to our hospital on the installation. And it was a challenging exercise, but I do remember thinking, man, why are we doing this? What are the chances of this? And I'm glad we thought a different discipline than just doing the active shooter.
How are you handling this? I mean, personally with your family, and I mean, with all the professional experience you have, I'm sure you carry a lot of that home with you. But I mean, what are you telling your kids and your extended relatives, and how are you preparing at home for COVID-19, and how do you manage your home life through being so, I'm sure, busy with taking care of 21,000 people, and all the responsibilities that you have? How do you manage through all that and also take care of the family?
I think Brig would reflect this even from 1989 and 1988. I personally always struggled with balance. It doesn't mean I don't value my family. I don't take my family for granted. But even as a young lieutenant, I found that to be challenging. I found it to be stressful. I enjoy it, but I simultaneously realize I don't have good balance. And I think I changed personally and professionally even more dramatically after I took battalion commander of the garrison at Fort A.P. Hill. It's really, really difficult to turn it off. And you can't turn it off. I mean, last night I received a couple texts from elected officials. I got texts from staff, had a couple of phone calls, got home about 7 o'clock last night. Again, not complaining. I'm very blessed to be here. But got home about 7 o'clock and then, still did that type of stuff until about 8:30. And so intellectually, I understand there's a need to decompress and get away. My wife and I have been gym rats for years. When I was in command at Fort Jackson, really the only time the most quality time is we had 5 different gyms on the installation. So we'd go check a different one out every day just to, I would check it out to make sure that we were doing good customer service, but then we'd work out there. And I've just continued that in retirement. We go to the Y 5 days a week, the local YMCA here. Now with that being shut down, I've gone back to running, Brig, and fortunately my knees I'm feeling it. The Achilles and the knees but I'm running 3 days a week, and then I do a CrossFit class that's online that the guy from the Y does. So that is a really saving grace for me right now, because it is 7 days a week. We walk on the weekends. We take some long walks or hikes. But the days I miss that, Steve, I just, I find myself just being really, why is this stuff bothering me? Francie will tell me, my wife say, you need to go out and run, when something like that goes on. The other thing I've noticed is that we moved into a really old house, and there's been a ton of projects that I've been wanting to get done, painting and just some like ceiling patches and stuff. And because everything's been shut down, there's not events on the weekend that we would go to, river cleanups or, altruistic events that, fundraisers for the local. We got something called the neighborhood that helps the homeless here. And so that stuff's all been shut down. So I've been finding a real cathartic release in just painting, trim in the house. And then on a very personal level, our granddaughter's about 2 months old, and man, just seeing that that'll recharge your battery too. But it's been, to your question, it's been tough because this is a crisis. My goodness, this is a pandemic. So you want to be available. You want to be there for staff. You want to be there for citizens, and trying to manage all that. And the social media, my gosh, I could go on for days about the impact of social media on cities and organizations. It's been, that's been a really, really tough one. And, how people respond to that, both the staff, some people think that every single thing needs to be addressed regardless of how ridiculous it is. And that sucks up a lot of staff time. It sucks up a lot of energy. And it's not that it's unimportant, but you all know there's no filter out there, that people can put salacious accusations and false accusations. I was really glad to see, what's the name of that thing where people could stay anonymous and make comments? Do you remember that platform? Topics. When Topics was out there, that had an indirect effect on us. I went on there a couple of times and read it, and I thought, man, why am I giving somebody this control over my emotions when they're not even willing to identify themselves? And so there's still people that put their names out there, but dealing with that is also challenging, because that's 24/7. I'll get a text, hey, did you see this? Did you see this post? Nope, I sure didn't.
Do you feel that's because that's a great point. We've been talking with customers and clients all over the world about the disinformation aspect or the misinformation. It might not be deliberate, an IO campaign against what's going on, but there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation that's being put out, and it's driving that fear mongering mentality, which creates the panic buying. Did you guys deal with a lot of that in Ashland like we did up here in Michigan? And I know Brig dealt with it out in California, but the fear and the panic buying and the shelves emptying, is that something you guys have experienced?
For the life of me, the toilet paper perplexes me. I just absolutely perplexes me. And maybe it's because we spent time in the Middle East and know, hey, a little water in your hand is okay. Just you got a little bit of soap afterwards and you're going to be good to go, right? I mean, the beauty of the, what's that, water flusher? I mean, I got to experience that before. I thought, man, I might want one of those in my retirement home. And now I understand those sales are going up on those. But yeah, what we saw locally here was a little bit of that. Definitely the shelves empty for toilet paper and cleaners, and sanitation type stuff. I saw us go a little bit bare in the meat section, but it was still there. We have a Kroger's is our biggest grocery store here. We got a couple of them in the local area, but for the most part, people were pretty steady state. Again, what you see on the media, national media, I never know how, do they do a close-in shot that shows like all this anxiety is going on, and then they accidentally slip out and it's like 8 people, you thought it was 150 people or something. Disinformation, misinformation, like you said, Steve, I guess it sells. But I think for the most part, people have stayed pretty calm here. We do have a food production plant just down the road from us, and I know, with everything that's going on, I believe in South Dakota and some of those other places where they've been shut down, the management here has come out and assured everybody that they're taking all the measures, social distancing, et cetera, to keep that plant going. But no, really haven't seen that too bad. Folks in Lowe's have done a pretty good job of social distancing, some of the hardware places. What I see now is, and I think this reflects nationally and also where each of us are living, is this struggle to when can we open. A lot of people questioning how severe this threat really was. Well, that's going to be an unprovable number. What is the impact of the social distancing that's gone on? What if we hadn't done that? I don't know. But I think a pretty calm approach, especially on not hoard buying here.
Yeah, Mike, as far as my background, I spent a lot of my career in Africa, FBI, and I think we can always look at those situations, those times in our life when life was very difficult. And I spent a lot of time by myself in different African countries, holed up sometimes where I couldn't, leave my flat or my hotel room because of violence outside or whatever the situation was. But I think my biggest challenge was just that isolation, just being almost in captivity, locked down. And I kind of reflect on that. But I also remember that a lot of that time I was sick, just from eating the different foods in the different places. And if you're country hopping, the food's different in, this country versus this. But, it can get worse. It can be worse. And again, I go back to my experience. We had power outages half the day in a lot of places. So I want to ask you as a city manager, how are you monitoring, kind of that worst case scenario? If we did get to the point where there was a food shortage, there were power outages, are you concerned about these type of scenarios?
That's a really, it's a great point and a damn hard question. Am I worried about it? Yes. Am I worried about it in the way that a city manager or public officials would be in New York City? Very different environment, population, so ultra dependent on those lines of supply. Whereas, and I'm not saying we could flip a switch here and go out and just, hunt deer and squirrels and be good to go, but a large population, a large percentage of our population are active hunters and fishers, and It's not as a dense a population here. We do have a lot of people that do self-farming, Victory Gardens, whatever. I don't want to go there, but really, I think the focus that we've got on that right now is historically, no, we haven't thought about that. For example, I don't have a pandemic response plan on my shelf. I mean, that's one thing that I don't want to sound defeatist. I don't have an operations section as a city manager. And so nobody really thinks about stuff like that. And I mean, it's in our mind. Law enforcement definitely is looking, like I said, at the force protection issues. And we've done a pretty good job of that. But as far as some of these other things as a garrison commander, where I had a DPTMS that focused on those and had a responsibility to have those plans, we don't have those here. And I don't know, again, because the impact on the economy of this, we are looking at, I mentioned before we had 308 authorized positions. Well, we already had 17 vacancies, and we're not hiring those vacancies because our revenue is going to decrease sharply. I was on a phone call yesterday with the Kentucky City Managers Association, and they had some economists, local economists that came in and talked about a 25% reduction in revenues. That's very real. I've got a requirement to the state to have a balanced budget. We don't do deficit spending here. So much in, so much out. We normally hire about 56 seasonals a year. We're not planning on hiring those seasonals. That's going to have a dramatic impact. That's about a 21% if you don't hire the 17 vacancies. We've had some people that have taken, that we've had to lay off, that have actually taken voluntary layoffs at this point, but there's going to be some involuntary layoffs, more than likely. And that, it's all adding to the complexity of this issue as, okay, well, we still have to provide those services. We still have to provide fire, police, utilities. When I turn on my tap water, I have to know that tap water is good. And I do drink it every day here. We, like most communities, have massive utility challenges because of underinvestment, and we're not different than the vast majority of communities in the nation. Our water line break rate, the AWWA recommends 14 breaks per 100 miles of pipe per year. Ours is 82. And my water crews, they're spectacular. If they had a water crew distribution line competition, I'd put my guys up against virtually anybody in the nation because they get daily practice at fixing breaks and laying pipe. But I think I've avoided your tougher question, Brig, and that is, how do we think about those really dire situations where the food supply is in danger? We do keep up with the state intel center that my chief of police coordinates with. We have a big focus on transportation day to day, and especially now, there are things going on that are suspicious that don't look right, that are trying to threaten that line of supply. And so we have good communications with both the gas company and also the electric company. Those are privatized organizations. We're not responsible for those here. I mean, to the point where, hey, our electric company sends me an email and some of my key leaders, hey, we're expecting this tough weather event, so be ready for it. We could have power outages, which has an impact on our pump stations, for example. But yeah, in the most dire circumstances, I'll give you the biggest non-answer. That'd be a tough situation for us.
Because we asked a pretty tough question here, right? But what keeps you up at night? What are your 50-meter targets of concern right now, right? The ones that, is it just managing the chaos, or is it, what bothers you, and then how are you handling that as a city manager?
So there's the things that keep me up at night with COVID-19, and then there's the things that keep me up at night just as a normal city manager. The ones that keep me up at night prior to COVID-19 is utilities, and that is our historic challenges. We are in the midst of bonding $10.5 million, which is not all we need. It's what we can afford to make SCADA upgrades on our water treatment plant, to replace filters at our water treatment plant that need to be replaced. We have already started 2 years ago, $1 million a year in line replacement, which sounds like a lot, but it's frankly not enough. A good water system needs to have at least 1% replaced a year, and we're gearing for that. We're trying to do that. Again, I got fantastic crews. When they're not doing breaks, they're doing line replacements. Keeping the quality of that water up, making sure the disinfectant byproducts and chlorine levels are safe, and we've done a magnificent job with that recently. 8 straight quarters of good ratings from the state was not always where we were in the city. Law enforcement is always stretched, and I know my chief of police would love to have more assets. I'd love for him to have more assets. He did take a great initiative. We are going to, oh gosh, I forgot the term, fleeting, self-fleeting, just forgot the name of it, home fleeting. And we were able to purchase enough vehicles for every officer to take a vehicle home. It gives us an omnipresence, which I think is important. It's going to give us a capability to surge. It dovetails nicely with right now, and we don't have them yet. They're on the verge of coming here, but Brig, if you and I are switching vehicles on shifts, you're A shift, I'm C shift, and we have to go through and clean the whole thing down properly. You're concerned about, hey, Gracie's a slob, maybe he sneezed all over the inside of the vehicle, that type of stuff. So home fleeting will be good for a variety of reasons. The opioid epidemic has really hit us hard here in Eastern Kentucky, and I know it's had an impact across the rest of the nation. But because of the unemployment, and now, my gosh, the spiked unemployment that's occurred, a lot of people turn to that. Brig, you talked about that impact of isolation on you. Man, what a great point to think about right now. Francie, my wife, goes a little bit nuts. She's not working outside of the home. She does a lot of volunteering at organizations, but she's gotten a little bit stir crazy. And, but yeah, probably the law enforcement, the utilities would keep me up at night normally. And not that, again, I want to be crystal clear. We've got a certified, fantastic police department and a great fire department. ISO rating on our AF Ashland Fire Department a couple years ago was a 2. I think only maybe 10% of departments in the nation get that rating, and we're really gearing for the 1. I mean, we want to get that 1 just as a measure of excellence and how good they are. But now, Steve, to your point on during the crisis, it's really that the virus gets a hold of those critical sections, and I hate to say it this way, but really the top 3 in providing that life, health, and safety in no particular order, but fire, police, law enforcement, and then utilities. So if the virus gets in and wreaks havoc with one of those staffs, that could be extremely difficult for us. And back to your point earlier, Steve, about the criticality of those mutual aid agreements. So that's probably what keeps me up at night right now.
Thanks, Mike. So we've got one final question, but I'm going to challenge you because it's going to be 2 parts. I just wanted to kind of finish up here and ask you to talk a little bit about first, really kind of your intel capability there and how that's different from the military in your position. And then 2, continuity of operations. And there I'm asking, are there things that are kind of lessons learned? Maybe you're talking to counterparts across the country, but continuity of operations, what can be done on the backside of COVID-19?
First off, on the intel, we do, as I mentioned before, we have state intel resources. We do have a state police detachment, not in Ashland proper, but right at the edge of the city and located in the county. We utilize those resources. The intel that we're getting through the HIDA task force is been especially beneficial. We have a regional working group that shares intel. This is law enforcement, shares intel very effectively. So I think what's different for me is that I don't have an S2, right? That's solely focused on that. But it is distributed. Well, it really primarily is the chief, the police chief, that has got lead on that. On the COOP, the COOP is really an interesting question. I don't have an ops center here in the city building. The Ashland, Boyd County, Catlettsburg Emergency Management does have an emergency operations center that they can surge to, that they've actually been running throughout this crisis. He's got a very thin staff day to day, so they've been supplemented from the county with some people that are doing different types of jobs for them, doing some administrative work tracking. I talked to you about those daily reports that come out and our weekly meetings that we have. And again, it sounds administrative, but if you don't track that information, it's tough. I have a weekly update with my staff, or excuse me, a daily update with my staff now. We used to have weekly staff calls, and we do a daily update right now that we do via business Skype for Business. And you know, I'm assembling that information that's on there. How many people have, you know, in the FFCRA categories? How many are in category 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6? Because I want to know. Steve, you know, your question about, or the response that I had on your question about the impact on staff. I had the epiphany last night, and you guys are probably going to say, well, yeah, you know, you should have saw this a long time ago, but how many people have been tested in the city, on the city staff, have actually had a COVID test? It's not something we've been tracking. And so the administration of that is a challenge for everybody. But for Coop, for us, as we don't have an operations center and we do have distributive operations, I've got the city building. I've got a separate police department that's across the street from us, 3 fire stations, water plant, the wastewater treatment plant. I have something called the Mill Street facility, which is where wastewater collection and also water distribution work out of. And we have a couple other recreational facilities. Great parks system here. We've got, if you ever pass through this part of the country, we've got a nearly 50-acre Central Park that's just gorgeous. I mean, it's beautiful. We've had to shut that down right now, except for the perimeter. And if you go out there on any sunny day, you'll see tens, if not hundreds, of people walking around that park. It is gorgeous. But of course, we had to shut down the interior because people wouldn't follow, or some people would not follow the you know, the yellow tape not to get on the playgrounds and things like that. So we had to take more draconian efforts. And that's one of the challenges now too, is, you know, what opening that up is going to look like. But our distributive operations and the different, and I've used this a couple of times, the different disciplines we have enable us to function from different locations. Administratively, it's not a problem. And now if we had a threat to one of those specific facilities, it would be facility dependent on how we respond to that. And we do actually have some contingency plans for that, and some that we've come close, even in my time here, to working because not of threats, but because of equipment challenges that we were looking at. Okay, well, how are we going to get, and I don't want to go too deep into this, but how are we going to get this function done if we're missing this facility? And so we've actually ran through that and brainstormed on those.
Well, we want to thank Mike Gracie for joining us on the TNG podcast. I've known Mike for over 30 years. He's a great family man. He's a strong leader. He's a humble leader, but he's always been a great servant to his country, to his state, and to the city of Ashland. So we appreciate your time, Mike, and we want to thank everyone for joining us on the TNG podcast, and you can visit us on our website at tngdefense.com.
You've been listening to the North Group Podcast. We're security, refined by intelligence. If you have questions for us, they can be emailed to info@tngdefense.com or visit our website at www.tngdefense.com. Don't forget to subscribe and stay safe.